It was a wet Friday night in Southport Heights, the kind of night where the city felt like it was drowning, not cleansing. A summer storm, violent and electric, had broken over the Great Lake, turning the sky a bruised purple and hammering the pavement with a relentless, percussive rhythm. The air smelled of ozone, wet asphalt, and the metallic tang of the nearby shipping yards. Inside the sterile brightness of the Lakeshore Medical Center, Rory Quinn finished her shift, 28 years old, with exhaustion pulling at the corners of her eyes. She was a night nurse, a resident of the quiet chaos that ruled the hours between midnight and dawn. She clocked out at 6:03 a.m., trading the scent of antiseptic and latex for the raw, rain-lashed air of the employee parking lot. Her only thought was Lark. She ran, her thin scrubs already darkening with the downpour, her sneakers splashing through shallow rivers forming in the cracked asphalt. She was heading for the 24-hour daycare annex, her heart pulling her faster than her tired legs wanted to move. That was when the world shifted. A procession of 3 immaculate, black SUVs cut the corner onto the access road, their tires hissing on the flooded pavement. They did not slow, they stopped. A coordinated, aggressive halt that screamed train precision. The vehicles idled, their engines a low thrum beneath the howl of the wind, their dark-tinted windows reflecting the flickering orange streetlights. The rear door of the center vehicle opened. A man emerged, stepping out into the deluge as if the storm itself was an inconvenience he merely had to tolerate. He was tall, dressed in a custom suit so dark it seemed to drink the meager light. Rain immediately plastered the fine wool to his shoulders and slicked his black hair back from his forehead. This was Cassian Vale, 35 years old, known in whispers as the Wharf King, the undisputed, unseen ruler of the lake's logistics, the shadow chancellor of Southport's entire shipping underworld. His eyes, the color of tempered steel, swept the parking lot once, assessing, dismissing, and possessing everything they touched. Rory froze, her hand reaching for the daycare door, stopped mid-air. The world compressed to the space of that parking lot, the sound of the rain fading to a dull roar. A small figure burst from the daycare entrance before Rory could move. "Mommy?" Lark, 3 years old and perpetually in motion, ran toward her, her bright yellow raincoat a sudden splash of sun in the oppressive gray. She stopped dead 3 feet from the SUV, captivated by the tall man who stood by the door. Rory's blood turned to ice. "Lark, come here, now!" But the child just tilted her head, her gaze unnervingly direct. She looked at Cassian Vale, a man whose presence made armed men shift their weight. She took 2 small steps forward, rising onto the very tips of her light-up sneakers, and enunciated each word with the profound seriousness only a toddler can muster. "Mr. I think you're my daddy." Silence, absolute and total. The rain seemed to hang suspended. Cassian's bodyguards, men carved from granite, went utterly still, their hands frozen near their jackets. Cassian Vale, the man who had faced down federal indictments and syndicate wars without blinking, just stared. He did not move. He barely seemed to breathe. His gaze dropped from Rory's terrified face to the small child in the yellow slicker. Rory's heart hammered against her ribs, a painful, frantic bird in a cage too small. "Lark, no! Honey, get back here!" She grabbed her daughter's arm, pulling her back, the small body resisting. Heat, sharp and painful, burned the back of her eyes. 3 years she had run. 3 years she had built a life from the wreckage of the one she'd fled. 3 years ago, she had walked away from Cassian Vale's world, carrying a secret that was now staring him in the face. From the end of the street, a small, sharp pop echoed. It was too clean for a backfire. It was followed, a second later, by the distant, rising wail of a siren. Instantly, the tableau shattered. Cassian's paralysis vanished, replaced by a chilling efficiency. He did not look toward the sound. He looked at the rooftops. He gave a sharp, subtle hand signal. His men fanned out, 2 moving toward the street, another flanking the hospital entrance, their movements fluid and economical. Rory recognized the reflex. It was the instinct of a man who lived his entire life anticipating the angle of the bullet, and she hated herself, hated the weak, terrified part of her that felt a flicker of safety under that predatory umbrella. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a text. She knew the sender without looking. The Federal Integrity Commission. She pulled it out with a shaking hand. The message was brief. Do not let him touch the child. The assignment is live. The assignment, her life, her child, reduced to an assignment. Cassian finally moved his head, his gaze lifting from the girl to the woman. He looked drained, hollowed out. He was loosening his silk tie, his knuckles white. His eyes were locked on Lark, who was now hiding half behind Rory's legs, peering out. He was studying the child's face, specifically her eyes. Amber eyes, the exact, unusual shade of amber as his mother, captured in the one faded photograph he kept in his wallet. He took a step, his voice barely a whisper, lost in the storm. Rory, is she... Rory's throat closed. She was trapped between the man who was her past and the agency that owned her future. No, she gasped, the lie tasting like ash. A sharp crack, much closer this time, split the air, not a pop, a gunshot, undeniable. Get inside, Cassian roared, his voice the command of the Wharf King, a sound that moved men and mountains. He did not wait. He lunged, his body covering the distance between them in 2 strides. He didn't grab. He shielded. One large hand enveloped Rory's shoulder. The other went to the back of Lark's head, tucking the child against his hip. He propelled all 3 of them in a desperate, tangled rush toward the automatic doors of the Lakeshore Medical Center. Rory said, "Yes!" in the same frantic breath as the shot, the truth torn from her by the sudden, violent terror. They stumbled through the entrance as the glass doors slid shut behind them, sealing them in the sterile light. The doors closed like a vault, a heavy, final barrier locking them inside, caught between the storm on the outside and the wreckage of the past that stood breathing beside them. The fluorescent lights of the pediatric waiting room hummed, a flat, artificial sound against the storm's fury outside. They were in a glass box, a sterile observation tank. Cassian had guided them here, his hand a heavy, warm presence on Rory's back, his men a silent, menacing perimeter in the main lobby. Lark, oblivious to the silent war waging around her, had immediately beelined for a brightly colored table piled with wooden blocks. Rory's mind, however, was a battlefield. 3 years ago, she had been Rory Quinn, forensic intern, ambitious and hungry for justice. The Federal Integrity Commission had seen that hunger. They had recruited her for Project Harborlight, a deep-cover operation aimed at the Veil Consortium. Cassian's legitimate front, the FIC wanted the source of the money, the routes, the names. They wanted the Wharf King. She had gone in as a warehouse coordinator, a clipboard and a sharp mind her only weapons. She had not been prepared for Cassian Vale. He wasn't a caricature, and he was intelligent, demanding, and possessed a quiet intensity that she found herself drawn to, despite every rule in her handbook. She fell in love with him between shipping manifests and late-night audits at the docks. Then came the 2 blue lines on a plastic stick. Pregnancy. It had terrified her, thrilled her. The same week, the FIC had given a new order, go deeper. They wanted her to leverage his affection, to get into his home, his private ledgers. They wanted her to use the intimacy she felt as a weapon. She had chosen her child. She vanished overnight, erasing her digital footprint, running on the sparse cash she had saved. She had chosen a life of obscurity as a nurse over a life of betrayal, refusing to make her unborn child a pawn. The FIC had promised her protection, a clean slate, but her handler, the weary but decent Inspector Phelps, had been reassigned. His replacement was Special Envoy Astra Lennox, a woman with eyes like polished steel and a reputation for breaking cases and people. Astra was all ambition, a collector of trophies. Rory and her child were now just a loose end, or worse, an asset to be reactivated. She trusted Astra Lennox even less than she trusted the men Cassian kept on his payroll. Across the room, Cassian was in his own hell. He stood by the window, his reflection a dark mirror against the rain-streaked glass. His internal counsel had been screaming at him for 6 months go legitimate, and he was. The new Vale Logistics was his answer. State-of-the-art dry ports, a fully refrigerated transport chain, proprietary tracking technology so clean you could eat off it. It was his future, his exit. But someone was sabotaging him from the inside, feeding anonymous tips to rivals, stirring the pot. Just yesterday, a tip had landed on a reporter's desk that his missing link from 3 years ago, Rory Quinn, had been the primary source of a massive information leak. He had come to the hospital tonight to find her, to find the truth. He had not come expecting to find a child. Lark finished with the blocks, trotted over to the small play kitchen. She picked up a laminated paper fish. No, she said to herself, serious. Mommy makes a whale. She went to her mother's bag, rummaged inside, and pulled out a small, folded object. It was a whale, crafted from a mint green wrapper. She held it up. See a whale? Cassian's gaze fixed on the paper. He could almost smell it. Mint, the specific sharp scent of the peppermint-infused paper he used to import from Japan, kept in his office at Pier Dune. He remembered nights working late, the scent mixing with the briny air. He remembered Rory, sitting across from his desk, folding those same papers into intricate shapes while they talked. Rory's phone vibrated, a sharp, angry buzz, another text from Astra. He cannot take the child. We lose our leverage. Bring them both to the Civic Shield rendezvous point now. We will not be able to provide cover if you delay. Cover, leverage. The words made Rory sick. Cassian turned from the window, his face pale. The mask of the Wharf King gone, leaving only the man. His voice was rough, barely audible. Why? Rory looked up, her own fear a cold stone in her stomach. Why what? Cassian. Why did you disappear? He asked. You ran. No note, no call. Your apartment cleared out. You vanished from the earth. I looked for you. The admission hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Rory stood up, putting herself between him and her daughter. She had 1,000 answers. Because I was a spy, because I was pregnant, because I was terrified. She gave him the only one that mattered, because you were born into a war I could never win. Cassian, and I wouldn't raise my child on the battlefield. His eyes searched hers, demanding, pleading, and then the calculation began. It was stark, a horrifying arithmetic playing out across his features. 3 years. She'd been gone for 3 years. He looked at Lark, who was humming to her paper whale, a child of about, he realized, 3. The blood drained from his face, the color, the power, the command, it all evaporated, leaving him hollow, stricken. He went ashen. Rory, he breathed, his voice cracking. Is she... Crack thwack? The sound was instantaneous, a high-velocity crack followed by the sickening impact of a bullet punching through the drywall. Not 5 inches above Lark's head, plaster dust exploded into the air. There was no thought, only reaction. Cassian's predatory instinct, the one Rory had recognized in the parking lot, took over. Down, he roared. He moved, a blur of dark wool and muscle. He didn't just push them, he tackled them. His body a solid shield, absorbing the impact of the floor as he covered both Rory and Lark. He twisted, pulling them behind the flimsy protection of the reception desk. Another shot. Crack ping! This one shattered the main window, sending a spiderweb of safety glass cascading onto the floor. The storm howled, ripping into the room. They're on the roof! Cassian snarled, his voice a low growl in her ear, his breath hot against her skin. The parking garage, it's Armitage. He was already moving, dragging her and a crying Lark low toward the emergency exit. They burst through the doors into the ambulance bay, the rain hitting them like a physical blow. An ambulance sat idling, its bay doors open. Behind it, move, He shoved them behind the vehicle's solid metal body just as another shot rang out, sparking off the concrete where they had been. Cassian crouched, shielding Lark with his body, his eyes scanning the rooftop. He had a small, dark stain on his hand, where he'd scraped it diving. Blood, dark and stark, mixed with the pouring rain. Rory was pressed against the cold metal, her heart trying to escape her chest, Lark sobbing into her scrubs. Cassian was there, a solid, terrifying wall of protection. She should be running from him, running to the FIC, but her feet were rooted. Her words of escape, her plea for help, all of it trapped in her throat, silenced by the man who was, impossibly, saving their lives. "This way! Stay low!" Cassian's voice was no longer human. It was a tool, sharp and cold. He hauled Rory to her feet, his other arm already scooping up Lark, who had buried her face in his neck, her sobs muffled against the wet wool of his suit. He did not run for the main lobby, where his men were now engaging the gunmen. He plunged deeper into the hospital's arteries, through a set of double doors marked "Authorized Personnel." The corridor was sterile, smelling of bleach and floor wax. He led them at a near run, his long strides forcing Rory to jog to keep up. "Where are we going?" she panted, her sneakers squeaking on the polished linoleum. "Emergency Transport Bay A3, he bid out. "It's a subterranean exit for sensitive surgical transfers. It bypasses the main grid." He stopped in an alcove, shifting Lark's weight. He winced, and Rory saw the gash on his hand, the one scraped raw in the dive, was bleeding freely, the dark blood stark against his pale skin. "Stop!" she commanded, the nurse taking over the victim. She yanked open a wall-mounted trauma kit, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She ripped open an antiseptic wipe and a heavy gauze pad. "Give me your hand." He hesitated, his eyes scanning the corridor. "There's no time." "You're bleeding on your daughter," she said flatly. That stopped him. He held out his hand. She scrubbed the wound clean, the sharp scent of alcohol and antiseptic cutting through the metallic tang of blood and the smell of fresh rain clinging to his clothes. He hissed, but his eyes never stopped moving. She wrapped the gauze tight, securing it with tape. Her touch was firm, impersonal, but her fingers lingered for half a second too long. He pulled his hand back as she finished. "Let's go." They descended a concrete stairwell, the air growing cooler, damper. They reached the ground floor north exit, a heavy steel fire door secured with a glowing red panel. It read Solant's security system. Rory's heart sank. "It's locked down, Solant's." She remembered this. Solant's was the shadow system, the security grid his predecessors had installed, the one Cassian despised. He claimed it was compromised, full of back doors for rivals and feds. He had been in the process of ripping it out, piece by $1,000,000 piece. Cassian didn't even try his normal access card. He reached into his wallet, into a hidden sleeve, and pulled out a thin, unmarked black card. He swiped it. The panel beeped, flashed a permissive green, and the heavy magnetic locks retracted with a loud thud. He used the very system he loathed to save them. The irony was a bitter pill as he shouldered the door open into a dark, echoing tunnel. The tunnel was pitch black. The automatic lights tied to the main grid were dead. Lark, who had been quiet against Cassian's chest, let out a piercing wail of pure terror. "Dark, it's dark. Mommy, I'm scared." "Shh, shh," Rory tried, but the child was frantic. Cassian stopped. He turned, shifting Lark so she was cradled against him. His voice, when he spoke, was not the command of the Wharf King. It was a low, steady rumble, a sound Rory hadn't heard in 3 years. "It's all right, little bird," he murmured, his breath warm against Lark's hair. "There's no dark. We're just in a tunnel, going to see the night boats. They have giant lights, brighter than the moon, and they sail all night. We just have to be very quiet so we can hear them." He kept walking, his steps measured, his breathing deep and even. Lark's sobs quieted, her small body relaxing against the steady rhythm of his heart, her terror soothed by the deep, calm vibration of his voice. The tunnel ended at a rolling steel gate. A 40-foot Vail Logistics refrigerated truck sat idling in the bay, its diesel engine a low throb. The driver's door swung open, and a woman dropped to the pavement. She was small, wiry, with her hair in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. Juno, Cassian's head of security. Juno didn't speak. She jerked her head, a frantic hurry-up motion. Rory climbed into the passenger seat, pulling Lark onto her lap. Cassian swung in beside Juno, taking the center. "Go," he commanded. "Shaking the tail," Juno said, her voice gravelly, slamming the truck into gear. The vehicle lurched forward. "No," Cassian said. Juno hit the brake, looking at him as if he were insane. "Sir, we have the child. Armitage is swarming the building." "Exactly," Cassian said, his eyes on the side mirror, watching the tunnel entrance. "They want us to run. I want them to follow. I want to see which rat hole they crawl back to when they lose us. Take the Gray Line Bridge. Do not lose them. Just beat them." Juno's eyes narrowed in understanding. She nodded once. She floored the accelerator, and the heavy truck roared up the ramp, bursting out into the driving rain. They hit the Gray Line Bridge at 60 miles an hour. The storm was a solid wall of water, the wind screaming through the steel girders. The rain hammered the cab roof like a drum solo. In the mirrors, 2 pairs of headlights appeared, black, heavy-frame motorcycles. "They're on us!" Rory yelled over the noise. "They're fast," Juno acknowledged, her knuckles white on the wheel. "But we're bigger." She held her speed as they approached the bridge's treacherous main curve. The bike split, one moving to overtake on the narrow shoulder. Juno didn't swerve. She hit a toggle switch on the dashboard, her thumb finding it by feel. The differential locked with a heavy clunk. As the bike drew level, Juno cranked the wheel hard, right, then left, and slammed the air brakes. The truck didn't just skid, it drifted. The massive 40-foot trailer swung out in a controlled, terrifying arc, a solid wall of steel wiping across both lanes. The biker on the right had nowhere to go, smashing into the guardrail to avoid the trailer. The one behind him locked his wheels, sliding to a stop, hopelessly boxed in. Juno was already off the brake, accelerating, the engine roaring in protest. They left the 2 black shapes behind like discarded toys. They were coming down the ramp for the Salt River Tunnel when it happened. A black sedan, parked dark in an emergency access lane, suddenly flashed its high beams, blinding them, and swerved out, completely blocking the tunnel entrance. A trap! Juno cursed, bracing for impact. In less than 2 seconds, Cassian moved. "Slide!" he roared. He unbuckled, grabbed Juno's jacket, and hauled her bodily out of the driver's seat, shoving her over the center console into Rory's lap. Rory cried out, crushed against the door, shielding Lark in the same fluid motion. Cassian threw himself into the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel before his body had even settled. His left hand held the wheel steady. His right hand slammed the gear shift. He did not brake. He floored it, aiming for the 2-foot gap between the sedan's rear bumper and the concrete tunnel wall. His eyes were alive, measuring the distance, the velocity, the angles, catching the pulse of the flashing hazards like the rhythm of gunfire. Metal screamed, the truck's side mirror vaporized, and the entire right side of the cab scraped the tunnel wall, sending a shower of sparks into the rain. But they were through. He didn't slow. He drove through the darkness of the tunnel and into the maze of the Pier Dune container yard. He killed the headlights, navigating the steel canyons by memory. He finally stopped in a dead-end row, beside a stack of old, rust-colored containers. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the rain drumming on the metal roof. Out! He led them to one of the containers. It looked abandoned, but he pressed his thumb to a nearly invisible panel, then typed a long passcode. A heavy, insulated door clicked open. Inside, it was not a shipping container. It was a clean room, an off-grid safe house for drivers, with 2 bunks, a small chemical toilet, and rations. Rory hurried inside with Lark. who was already asleep, her small body limp with exhaustion. She laid her on the bottom bunk, covering her with a rough wool blanket. Rory turned and slid the heavy steel bar across the door, the sound echoing with terrible finality. Her heart felt bruised, still hammering against her ribs. Ashen stood in the middle of the small space, soaked to the skin, rainwater puddling at his feet. He was watching Lark sleep, his expression broken, his usual control shattered. He didn't look at Rory. He just stared at the child, his voice raw. "If you had told me sooner." It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a wound opening. Rory leaned back against the cold steel door, the last of her strength failing. "If their agency," she whispered, her voice shaking with a sudden, cold fury, "hadn't decided to use me as bait." The two ifs hung in the small, cold room, heavy and sharp as knives. The single yellow bulb overhead cast a warm, sickly glow, turning the steel container into a small, insulated world, outside. The storm raged, the sound of the rain drumming on the metal roof a constant, dull roar, a reminder of the chaos they had just escaped. The air was cold, thick with the smell of damp wool, ozone and rust. Rory shivered, a violent, full-body tremor that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with the adrenaline crash. Her wet scrubs clung to her skin, and the memories were clinging tighter. She peeled off her sodden cardigan, her fingers numb and clumsy. Cassian watched her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He moved to a small footlocker built into the wall and pulled out a heavy, dark gray hoodie. It was old, worn soft. He held it out. "Put this on. You're freezing." She took it, her fingers brushing his. The fabric was thick, and as she pulled it over her head, she was enveloped in a scent that punched the air from her lungs. Peppermint soap, his soap, the scent of his penthouse, of late nights at Pier Dune, of a life she had buried 3 years ago. The smell was so strong, so tied to him. It felt more intimate than a touch. She pulled the sleeves down over her shaking hands, her small frame lost in the garment. He was still standing there, water dripping from his hair onto the shoulders of his ruined suit. The space between them was a chasm, 3 years wide and filled with the sleeping form of a child who had his mother's eyes. Rory's gaze fell on the crude bandage on his hand, already soaking through. She stepped forward, her training a shield for the terrifying proximity. "Your hand." She reached out, intending to check the dressing, but her hand didn't stop there. She placed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. It was a clinical move. She was checking his pulse, his respiration. That was the excuse. She felt the heavy, frantic thud, thud, thud beneath her hand, a rhythm that was just as erratic as her own. He was not as calm as he appeared. Her fingers splayed, staying a fraction of a second too long, then another. He covered her hand with his, trapping it against his chest. The move was quick, possessive, his skin still cold from the rain. "Rory," he whispered, his voice rough. She looked up. Meeting his eyes, the steel was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate vulnerability she had never seen. "Do I have the right," he asked, his voice cracking, "to put my hands on you again?" The air left the room. Her mind screamed, no, it screamed epic danger, run, but her body, wrapped in the scent of him, her hand feeling the desperate beat of his heart, betrayed her. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't lunge. He didn't grab. His bandaged hand came up, his touch impossibly gentle, his thumb brushing the water from her cheek. His other hand settled on her waist, not pulling, just resting. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. When his lips met hers, it was not a collision, it was a question. It was soft, hesitant, and profoundly sad. It tasted of rain and the metallic tang of fear, and the peppermint on his skin. It was a language they had both spoken fluently, now remembered in broken, faltering fragments. She answered, her lips moving against his, a silent yes. The kiss deepened, and her hands, of their own accord, came up to grip the lapels of his wet suit jacket. He pulled back, only an inch, resting his forehead against hers. "I thought you were dead," he breathed, the admission torn from him. "For 3 years, I thought they had gotten to you." She started, but the words failed. He silenced her by pulling her flush against him. It was not a prelude to passion. It was the desperate act of a man finding his anchor. His arms wrapped around her back, one hand splayed wide, holding her as if she might dissipate into the air. He wasn't holding her to him. He was holding her safe. She pressed her face into the damp wool of his suit, her body finally succumbing to the exhaustion, the terror, the impossible relief. She was holding on to the one man she was supposed to destroy. He was shielding her from the allies who were supposed to protect her. They stood like that for a long time, rocked by the storm outside, their breathing slowing, their heartbeats gradually finding a matched, calmer rhythm. He guided them to the small, electric portable heater glowing in the corner, and they just stood, wrapped in its small bubble of warmth. His hand slid from her back up into her wet hair, his fingers tunneling through the strands to cup the back of her head. He didn't try to kiss her again. He just held her. "Don't be afraid," he whispered into her hair. "I've got you." The dam inside her broke. A tear, hot and silent, slipped down her cheek, and then another. He held her through it, his hand a steady, warm pressure. Finally, she pulled her head back, her hands sliding up to frame his face, her thumbs brushing the stubble on his jaw. "Cassian." He looked at her, and this time, when she leaned in, the kiss was deeper, surer. It was a kiss of shared fear, of years lost, of a future that was a terrifying, blank page. His lips were firm, moving over hers with a desperate, restrained hunger that spoke of control, not consumption. It was the whisper of breath, the tightening of his arms, the way his fingers knotted in her hair that told the story. A small cough came from the bunk. Instantly, they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. The spell was broken. A quiet, breathless laugh escaped Rory. Cassian ran his good hand through his soaking hair, a shadow of a smile touching his lips. He turned to the bunk. Lark had kicked off the heavy blanket in her sleep. He moved toward her, his large frame casting a shadow over the small child. He looked impossibly large, impossibly dangerous, next to her. But he reached down, his movements slow, and gently pulled the blanket back up, his scarred, bandaged hand tucking it under her chin. Rory watched, her throat tight. She had never let herself imagine this. She had never let him be this. A father. He sat on the edge of the opposite bunk, the silence stretching. But it was no longer an empty chasm. It was filled. "The night shifts," Rory said, her voice quiet. "I took them so I could be with her during the day. Some nights I'd be rocking her, and she'd look at me with those eyes." She met his gaze. "I used to wonder if you ever saw them in your own mirror." He flinched, the confession landing like a physical blow. He stared at his hands, then back at her. "I've been trying to get out, Rory, for the last year completely. Armitage, the old syndicates, they're dinosaurs. They live on blood. I'm building a legitimate corporation, the cold chain, the new logistics tower, something clean, something that would have been safe for you." He stood, walked to his discarded, soaked suit jacket. He took his wallet from the inner pocket. He didn't pull out a picture. He pulled out a single, black, featureless keycard. He walked back to her and pressed it into her hand. It was cold plastic. "This isn't a promise of a future, Rory. It's a guarantee of one. The new Vale Logistics Tower. That card gets you to the penthouse level. It's a secure floor, reinforced walls, its own air and power. Not even my own men can get up there without my thumbprint." He closed her fingers over the card. "If anything happens, if I'm not there, and you're in trouble, you don't call anyone. You take her, and you run here. You understand me? You run here." She held the card. The weight of it, the simple, practical reality of it, more powerful than any diamond ring. It was a key. It was an escape plan. It was In his world, the truest declaration he could make. The small, insulated world of the container was breached an hour before dawn, not by Armitage, but by a sharp, encrypted knock on Cassian's laptop. Juno? She'd been digging, not in Armitage's systems, but in their own. "I found the leak," Cassian said, his voice flat, staring at the screen. He turned the laptop for Rory to see. Juno had not been hacking externally. She had been performing a deep-level data recovery on Vale's own servers, a perfectly legal internal audit. She had found a deleted, corrupted audio file. They listened, the tinny recording filling the small space, a woman's voice, crisp and professional, Astra Lennox, a man's voice, older, smoother state judge, Calder Nash. "The warrant needs to be no knock and all assets. Calder," Astra's voice said. "We need to hit Vale hard enough to make him bleed, make him look guilty as sin. The Urban Cleanse Initiative needs a poster boy, and I'm giving them the Wharf King." "This is thin." "Astra," the judge replied. "What's the real play?" "The play," Astra said, her voice dropping, "is that Armitage delivers the anonymous tip about the hospital nurse. We use that to justify the warrant. We paint Vale as a monster who put his own child in the crossfire. We seize his new logistics, and Armitage gets a piece. I get the biggest bust of the decade, and my budget for the initiative triples. Everyone wins." The recording ended. Rory felt the floor drop out from beneath her. It was a setup, a pincer movement. Astra, the FIC, was in bed with the Armitage Syndicate. Cassian was the scapegoat, the trophy they would both mount on their wall. She looked at her phone. Still dark, the texts from Astra. "Bring them to the Civic Shield rendezvous. We will not be able to provide cover." There was no Civic Shield. There was no protection. There was only a trap. She and Lark had never been anything but bait, a tool to pressure Cassian, to box him in, to force him to sign a deal as an informant, just so they could betray him. Cassian closed the laptop, his face a mask of cold fury. "She's using you," he said, his voice a low growl. "She's using my daughter." He began to type, his movements fast and precise. "Juno, liquidate the secondary holdings, move all non-essential assets." He was messaging his legal team. "I want the Lark Foundation activated. Now. Not tomorrow. Now." "What are you doing?" Rory asked, her voice shaking. "My clean plan," he said, his eyes on the screen. "I'm accelerating it. I'm transferring 51% of Vale Logistics, the legitimate company, into a blind trust. It will be named for her. The Lark Foundation. It locks the shares. Armitage can't touch them, and the feds can't seize them without proving the foundation itself is corrupt, which it isn't. It's an irrevocable charter for children's welfare. If I go down, if they take me, all of it. It all goes to the kids of this city, not to them." It was a brilliant, desperate move, a scorched earth policy that turned his own empire into a shield for his child. The counterattack from Armitage came 2 days later. They weren't in the container. Juno had moved them to a small, nondescript apartment above a bakery, the air thick with the smell of yeast and sugar. Rory's phone rang. It was her nursing supervisor, her voice full of regret. "Rory, the board received an anonymous tip, an audit. They're accusing you of embezzling from the pharmacy's discretionary fund." "What? That's insane," Rory protested, her blood running cold. "I know, honey, but they have logs. They look real. The hospital has to suspend you, pending a full investigation." Rory hung up, her world tilting. They were cutting her off, isolating her, painting her as an unreliable criminal. It was Astra. It was Armitage. Cassian, who had heard the one-sided conversation, picked up his own phone. "Juno, I want the name of the reporter who broke it. I want the editor. I want—" "No," Rory's voice was sharp, cutting him off. He turned, his eyes dark with a rage she recognized, the violent impulse of the Wharf King. "No, Cassian, you can't. You touch them, you threaten anyone, and you prove them right. You prove you're the animal they say you are. You want to be clean. This is it. You have to stand there and take the punch. You have to keep your hands clean." He stared at her, his jaw working, the muscle knotted tight. He was a man built to retaliate, to strike back twice as hard. He slowly, deliberately, put the phone down on the counter. "They are coming after my family, Rory." "I know," she said, her own resolve hardening into something new, something cold. "So I'm going to come after theirs." She picked up her own phone. She sent a text to Astra Lennox. "I'm done running. We need to talk. Alone. Federal Annex parking garage. 1 hour." Astra's reply was instant. "Level 4, North End. Come alone. It's time to pick a side, girl." "What are you doing?" Cassian demanded. "You can't go to her." "I'm not," Rory said, pulling her hair back into a tight, functional ponytail. She unpinned her Lakeshore Medical Center name badge from her hoodie. With nimble fingers, she pried the plastic casing apart, tucked inside. Behind her name was a tiny, wafer-thin audio chip, a relic from her FIC training. I'm going to let her talk. The Federal Annex garage was a concrete tomb, smelling of damp and exhaust fumes. Astra Lennox stood alone, leaning against a black government sedan, a stark figure in a sharp pantsuit. "You're a fool for coming," Astra said, her voice echoing in the empty space. "He'll never be clean. Rory, men like that don't change. They just repaint the walls." "What do you want, Astra?" Astra pushed off the car, taking a step closer, her eyes glittering. "I want you to finish the job. Bring Vale into the light, girl. Testify. Give me the last pieces I need to put him away. Let me make him clean." She smiled, a thin, cruel expression, and then dirty again. "At my discretion, help me, and I can make the hospital problem go away. I can even arrange for that civic shield program we discussed." The lie was so blatant, so cold. Rory finally saw her. Not a protector, not a federal agent, just another gangster, one with a badge. Rory just looked at her, the tiny recorder in her badge capturing the hum of the garage, the drip of water, the damning words. "I choose my daughter," Rory said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing. "Wrong answer," Astra yelled after her. As Rory reached the exit stairwell, 2 black sedans not government-issued, but the same type that had been at the hospital peeled around the corner, their headlights flashing on, tires squealing. They were moving to box her in against the wall. Rory froze, her heart leaping into her throat. A gray sedan she hadn't even registered shot out from a parking space behind her, its engine roaring. Juno. The car slid to a perfect stop, the passenger door flying open. "Get in, now, Rory, now!" Rory didn't hesitate. She dove into the car, pulling the heavy door shut as the 2 sedans screeched to a halt, blocked by Juno's vehicle. Juno threw the car into reverse, spun the wheel, and floored it down the exit ramp, the sound of shouting men lost in the shriek of the tires. They burst out into the afternoon light, merging seamlessly into traffic. Rory was breathing hard, her knuckles white as she clutched the name badge in her hand. She was done. The line had been crossed. She looked at Juno, the small, quiet woman who had just saved her life. Rory was no longer an FIC asset. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer running. She was fighting with Cassian, and she was going to bring them all down. The apartment above the bakery was compromised the moment Astra's men had seen Juno's car. They were ghosts again, moving through the city's veins in the back of a panel van with no markings. Cassian drove for 2 hours, long after the city lights had dissolved into the black ink of the countryside, until he turned onto a gravel road marked by nothing but a faded, reflective post. He called it Farmhouse Northline. It was a renovated 2-story farmhouse, standing alone in a sea of dark, unplanted fields. It was part of the Vale portfolio, but it was not in Cassian's name. It was registered to a former driver, a man who had retired 20 years ago and had been dead for 10. It was a true ghost. "There are no cameras here," Cassian said, his voice low as he unlocked the heavy oak door. "The signal is weak. No fiber optics. Nothing smart. It's the safest place I have." The air inside was cool and smelled of cedar and old books. It was a home, not a safe house. For 3 days, the war was a distant hum, a bad signal. On the first morning, Lark discovered a bag of waffle mix and demanded a celebration. Rory, weary but grateful for the simplicity, found the old iron in the pantry. Cassian, in a borrowed flannel shirt, looked entirely out of place, a wolf attempting to domesticate itself. "I can do it," he insisted, taking the bowl of batter from Rory. He was expectedly terrible at it. He poured too much, the batter oozing over the sides in thick, sticky rivers. He tried to flip the first one too early, tearing it into a steaming, grotesque shape. Lark, perched on a stool, watched his growing frustration with intense focus. "You're doing it wrong, mister," she announced. "I am," Cassian agreed, a growl in his voice. He grabbed the bag of flour to thicken the mix, and a cloud of white powder erupted, dusting the front of his shirt and landing directly on the bridge of his nose. He froze. Rory froze. Lark did not. She let out a peal of laughter, a sound like tiny silver bells. It was a pure, unadulterated sound of joy, bright and sharp in the quiet kitchen. "You have a white nose, you're a clown." Cassian's shoulders, which had been knotted with tension for days, visibly dropped. A slow, unfamiliar smile spread across his face, erasing the shadows from his eyes. He looked at the flour, then at Lark, and he laughed, a real, quiet laugh. He dabbed a finger in the flour and gently tapped the tip of her nose. "Now you're a clown, too." That afternoon, Rory sat on the porch step, brushing Lark's fine, amber-flecked hair. "I need 2, Lark demanded, holding up 2 fingers. 2 braids, like Mommy. "I can't," Rory said, her fingers clumsy. "I'm not good at the 2 braid. "I'll try," Cassian said, his voice quiet. Rory looked up, surprised. He sat on the step below them, and Lark, trusting, turned to face him. Rory watched, astonished. She guided his hands once, showing him how to separate the 3 strands. She watched his hands, large, scarred, bandaged, hands that had signed million-dollar contracts and gripped steering wheels at impossible speeds, hands that had, she had no doubt, inflicted pain. Those same hands were now fumbling, impossibly clumsy, trying to weave 3 strands of fine, toddler hair. He was concentrating with the same intensity he'd had when he'd faced down Astra. His brow was furrowed, his tongue stuck out the corner of his mouth. The result was a lopsided, loose-ended mess. But it held. "It's done," he said, his voice rough with something that sounded like pride. Lark turned, her pigtails flopping. She beamed. "Thank you, Daddy." He went still. She had never called him that before. He looked at Rory over the child's head, his eyes radiant, his expression completely unguarded. That night, the storm returned, a gentle rain this time. Lisping against the windows, Lark was asleep upstairs, her mismatched pigtails intact. Cassian was standing by the living room window, staring out into the blackness, the Wharf King back in his cage. Rory came up behind him. She didn't speak. She just laid her hand on his back. He didn't turn, but his muscles tensed under her touch. She initiated it. She moved around to face him, stepped inside his personal space, and put her hands on his chest. She felt his heart kick, a sudden, heavy beat. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the braids." "It was hard," he admitted, his voice low. "I know," she said. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was a slow, deliberate kiss, full of the day's warmth, the waffles and the laughter. It was a kiss of gratitude, not of desperation. He responded, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. The kiss deepened, a long, lingering exploration by the rain-streaked window. It was a promise of tomorrow, a whisper of healing. Later, they lay on the old quilt on the floor in front of the cold fireplace, fully dressed, the rain the only sound. They were just close, his arm a heavy, warm weight over her waist, her head tucked into his shoulder. She could feel the steady, slow rise and fall of his chest. It was an intimacy that was deeper than skin, a sharing of breath in the darkness, a silent vow to protect the small life sleeping upstairs. The peace shattered at 3 a.m., a secure satellite phone, a brick-like device Cassian had pulled from his bag, buzzed on the floor. A text-only message from Juno. Armitage is making a dramatic play. City Green Freight Forum, 2 days. They plan to publicly out Vale's old guard connections during your keynote on the new cold chain. They're seating ringers in the press corps. They intend to use the event as a media execution. Cassian read it, and the warmth in the room vanished. The air went cold. "I'm canceling," he said, his voice flat. "I'm pulling the announcement. We'll go darker. Leave the country." "No." Rory sat up, pulling the quilt around her. She was the nurse from the garage, the woman who had faced Astra. "No, you can't. If you run, they win. They'll paint you as a coward who fled. They'll seize Vale Logistics. They'll seize the Foundation. And they'll never, ever stop hunting us." "So what? Rory, I walk onto a stage into a firing squad." "You flip the script," she said, her voice gaining strength. "They want a show. We give them one. But we have to win the audience before the show even starts." She tapped the satellite phone. "They're bringing knives to a gunfight, Cassian. They don't know we have the recording." The next morning, Lark sat at the kitchen table, drawing with a box of broken crayons. She held up a piece of paper. It was a child's drawing, 3 stick figures, one large, one medium, one small. They were holding hands under a wild scribble of yellow and black. "It's us," she said. "We're under the Bridge of Lights." Rory's throat tightened. She took the drawing and, with a small magnet, pinned it to the refrigerator. A domestic act, a reminder of the only thing that mattered. Cassian watched her, his face grim. He had been on the phone for an hour, talking in low, coded words to Juno and his legal team. He hung up and looked at the drawing. "I'm scared," he said, the words so quiet she barely heard them. She turned. "What?" "I'm not scared of Armitage. I'm not scared of their guns, or their stage play." He looked at her, his eyes stripped bare of all pretense. "I'm terrified of seeing that look in her eyes, the one she'll get if they win, the one that says her father failed." Rory walked to him, taking his face in her hands just as he had done to her. "She won't," she said, her voice fierce. "Because we won't. You are not the man you were. Cassian, you're the man who learned to braid." She pulled him close, holding him. He buried his face in her hair, his large body shaking with a single, controlled tremor. She held him, her heart beating a steady, strong rhythm against his, their 2 hearts finally, after 3 long years, knocking in the exact same time. The ballroom for the City Green Freight Forum was a sea of blue lanyards and press credentials. The air was thick with the manufactured enthusiasm of a corporate event, all bright lights and polite applause. At the front, on a massive high-definition screen, a sleek animation showed the new Vale Logistics electric refrigerated container, silent, zero-emission, revolutionary. Cassian stood at the podium, a man reborn in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He was not the Wharf King. He was Mr. Vale, the CEO. His voice was calm, measured, deliberately devoid of the usual corporate hype. He spoke of logistics, of carbon footprints, of a sustainable future for the Southport waterfront. He was controlled, professional, and utterly boring. It was the performance of his life. The trap sprung during the quanda. A man in the 3rd row, accredited to a small trade blog, stood up. "Mr. Vale, how can you talk about a green future when your entire empire was built on greenwashing, dirty money from the Armitage Syndicate?" Before Cassian could answer, another man from the balcony yelled, "Money launderer!" On cue, 2 more men near the stage hurled containers of paint. Bright, viscous green paint splattered across the white backdrop, missing Cassian but coating the new container model. The room erupted. Cameras flashed, people shouted, and the carefully constructed event descended into chaos. Through it all, Cassian remained still, his eyes scanning the crowd, not for the hecklers, but for the exits. In the wings, Juno acted. They're just the diversion. Z3, now. She didn't grab Rory, she grabbed Lark, sweeping the child into her arms and propelled Rory through a backstage door, barricading it behind them in the secure, windowless room. "It's starting," Rory said, her heart hammering. "Stay here. Lock this. Do not open it," Juno commanded, and was gone. Rory locked the door, her hands shaking. She could hear the muffled roar of the crowd. This was it. The ambush. She looked at Lark, who was watching her, her small face pale with confusion. "It's okay, baby," Rory whispered. "Mommy just has to do some work." She pulled out her phone. She didn't open a social media app. She opened the secure portal for the Lakeshore Medical Employee Network, an internal blog trusted by thousands of city nurses, doctors, and hospital staff. She clicked Go Live. She angled the phone, her face filling the small screen. "My name is Rory Quinn. I'm a night nurse at Lakeshore," she began, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "You know me. You know my work. And I am being hunted." The viewer count, which started at 12, began to climb. 40, 100, 300. "2 nights ago," she continued, her voice low and urgent, "I was leaving my shift with my 3-year-old daughter. We were attacked in the employee parking lot. Men with guns, the man you see on that stage, Cassian Vale, shielded my child from bullets with his own body." The view counter jumped past 1,000. Back in the ballroom, Cassian saw the commotion in the press pit. He saw reporters turning from him, looking down at their phones, their expressions changing from cynical interest to shock. He saw his own tech team leader, in the front row, look up and meet his gaze. Cassian gave the signal, a single, subtle nod. The feed on the massive screen behind him, which had been showing a static Vale logo, suddenly cut to black. The shouting in the room died down, replaced by a confused murmur. Then, a new audio file began to play, piped directly through the ballroom's high-end sound system. The tinny, corrupted sound of Astra Lennox's voice filled the air. "The warrant needs to be no knock and all assets. Calder." A horrified silence fell over the room. The press, the investors, the city council members, they all stood frozen, listening. "Now Armitage delivers the anonymous tip about the hospital nurse. I get the biggest bust of the decade, and my budget for the initiative triples. Everyone wins." The recording clicked off. The room was utterly silent. The shouts of money launderer were gone. The faces in the crowd were no longer jeering. They were stunned, and then they were furious. But the fury was not for Cassian. It was in that precise moment of silence that the main doors of the ballroom burst open. A dozen officers in dark blue tactical gear marched in, their vests emblazoned with MSU Meridian Urban Surveillance. They were the city's other federal task force, Astra's direct budgetary rival. They moved with purpose, fanning out, their intent clear. They weren't here to control the crowd, they were here to make an arrest. Their commander, a man with a hard face, pointed at Cassian. "Mr. Vale, for your own protection, you need to come with us. Now." They were protecting him, right into a black site. From the wings, the locked door to room Z3 burst open. Lark, terrified by the shouting, had slipped out when a crew member fled. She saw the men in uniforms. She saw the chaos, and she saw Cassian on the stage, surrounded. "Daddy?" She ran, a small, 3-year-old child in a yellow dress, running full tilt across the massive stage, past the paint-splattered container. She didn't stop until she reached him, her small arms wrapping around his leg, clinging to him like a life raft. The press went insane. Cameras flashed, a wall of strobes. The MSU officers stopped, their training giving them no protocol for this. Lark looked up at the forest of strangers, terrified. She saw the microphone on the podium, just at her eye level. She screamed into it, her small, high-pitched voice echoing through the entire, silent auditorium, amplified 100 times. "I want to go home with my daddy and mommy." That single, childish plea shattered every narrative. It cut through the politics, the conspiracy, the corporate posturing. It was the truth. The MSU commander visibly hesitated, lowering his hand. In the back of the room, near an exit, Astra Lennox, who had been watching her victory unfold, saw it all collapse. She lost control. She grabbed her phone, her face purple with rage, and hit a number. "Nash, it's blowing up. That damn child. He's using the kid. You have to kill the warrant. I don't care. Just do it. We'll grab the kid as deterrence. She didn't realize the sound technician, cued by Cassian's team, had isolated her phone's frequency. Her frantic, panicked voice was now also booming over the main speakers, her admission to grab the kid as deterrence echoing over the stunned silence. The room didn't just murmur, it exploded. The outrage was a physical wave. Cassian Vale stood, his hand on his daughter's head. He did not run. He did not raise his voice. He looked at the MSU commander, at the enraged press, and at the red recording lights on every camera. He looked at his lawyer, who stepped forward to the podium. "Mister, Vale will not be going with you," the lawyer said, his voice cold and clear. "Instead, he invites the press, the members of the Meridian Task Force, and the public to a voluntary public hearing before the City Public Works Committee. This Friday, at this hearing, he will provide a full, sworn deposition on the complete separation of Vale Logistics from all gray market associations, and will detail the conspiracy, including members of the FIC and the judiciary, that attempted to sabotage his legitimate enterprise." It was a legal masterstroke, a trap. He had just publicly, on every news channel, agreed to testify. If Astra or Armitage or Meridian made a move on him now, if he disappeared before Friday, it would not be an arrest. It would be a silencing. He had just checkmated them all, using their own stage. The night before the hearing was not a time for rest. It was a time for war. They were in the penthouse of the Vale Logistics Tower, the secure floor Cassian had given Rory the key for. It was a fortress of glass and steel, high above the city, and Cassian was using it as a command center. He called it Operation Lantern. With his core legal team and a frantic, remotely working accounting firm, he began the final, systematic dismantling of his old life, any remaining shadow assets. Any gray market holdings or accounts that his father had built were moved in a series of rapid, legally binding transfers. He liquidated everything, pushing 100% of the value into the Lark Foundation. It was all witnessed, notarized, and countersigned by an independent auditing firm, working under the threat of disbarment if they flagged it incorrectly. "If they come for me," Cassian said, his voice low and steady as he signed another wire transfer, "if they try to seize my assets, they will be seizing a fully funded public trust. Let them explain to the city why they are stealing from its children." While Cassian built his legal fortress, Juno and Rory were sharpening their knives. Miles away, in the back of a nondescript van, Juno was executing her own heist. She had found a vulnerability in the data hub of Armitage's Willow Depot. It was a clean infiltration, no alarms. She slipped past their firewalls and downloaded the one thing they never thought to protect: their shipping manifests, the real ones, schedules, container numbers, and destinations that detailed a horrific trade in illicit cash and, worse, people. She encrypted the file and sent it to Rory. Rory, sitting at the massive glass conference table in the penthouse, received the data. She didn't give it to Cassian. She didn't give it to his lawyers. She used a military-grade encrypted burn phone, routed through 3 different countries, to make one anonymous call to the Clean Ports Alliance, a notoriously aggressive non-profit watchdog. Her voice, digitally altered, was thin and terrified. "I work at the depots," she whispered. I saw this. I think they're shipping people. Please, look at this. I'm scared." She uploaded the file, severed the connection, and wiped the phone. The fuse was lit, and her fingerprints were nowhere near it. Exhaustion finally settled around 3 in the morning. The lawyers had left. Juno was monitoring the city's nervous system. Rory found Cassian standing on the outdoor terrace, the wind at this height cold and sharp, whipping his dark hair. He was staring down at the lights of the city he had once owned. She came up behind him, not touching, just standing near. "It's done," she said. "It started," he replied. He turned, his eyes finding hers in the dim light from the skyline. "I'm scared, Rory." "You said that before," she whispered, "in the farmhouse." "That was for her," he said, his voice raw. This is for me. Tomorrow, I walk in there and hand them the keys. Everything my father built, everything I was." It was a prison," Cassian, she said, stepping closer, finally laying a hand on his chest. "Tomorrow, you're free." He covered her hand with his gaze searching hers. He leaned down, and the kiss was slow, desperate, and cold from the wind. It was a kiss of shared fear, of two soldiers on the eve of the final battle. His hands gripped her waist. Hers clutched the lapels of his shirt, her back pressing against the cool steel railing of the terrace. It was a deep, consuming kiss, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had survived. But as it deepened, as the control that held them both began to fray, she pulled back, her breath a cloud in the cold air. "We can't," she whispered, her forehead resting against his. "We can't lose ourselves. Not now. Not until she's safe." He nodded, his own breathing ragged. He just held her, his arms a steel band around her, shielding her from the wind. A secured phone, one she didn't recognize, buzzed on the terrace table. A text from an unknown number. It was just one sentence. "Trade the child for safety. North Spur Station, 5 a.m. Come alone, or the hearing will be her eulogy." The air ignited. The quiet, terrified man was gone. The Wharf King was back, his eyes turning to black ice. "Juno," he snapped into his own phone. "Get the car. I'm going alone." "No." Rory stepped in front of the elevator, blocking his path. "Rory, so help me God, get out of my way." "No." Her voice was steel. "You're a brilliant strategist, Cassian, but you're a terrible father right now. You can't see the board. This isn't a ransom, it's the trap. They want you to go alone. They want to grab you, off book, before the hearing. They want to take you out of the equation. We are not bargaining with our daughter. We are going together, but we are not bringing her." The first stop, at 4:30 in the morning, was St. Aurora's Church. It was a small stone sanctuary in a quiet, forgotten neighborhood, one of the primary, anonymous recipients of Vale's charitable funds for a decade. Sister Magda, a woman with eyes that had seen everything, met them at the side door. Mr. Vale." She nodded, her gaze falling on the sleeping child in Rory's arms. "You called. She will be safe here. We have a library. She can sleep among the books. No one will find her." Rory's heart felt like it was being ripped from her chest. She kissed Lark's forehead, the child stirring but not waking, and handed her to the nun. "Mommy has one last, big job to do, baby," she whispered. 5 a.m. North Spur Station was a skeleton of glass and steel, empty in the gray, pre-dawn light. "They're here," Juno's voice whispered in their earpieces. "Southeast stairwell, 4 of them, and stand by. An MSU van just rounded the corner. Meridian, they're coordinating." "It's the sting," Cassian said, his hand finding Rory's. "I know." They stood on the empty platform, a perfect target, but Juno's counter trap was already in motion. In an alcove by the dead ticket machines, a small figure sat huddled, wearing Lark's bright yellow raincoat, a life-size doll, weighted, and fitted with a thermal pad to give off a human heat signature. The Armitage men moved first, fast and low, guns drawn, moving to grab the child. As their hands touched the doll, the MSU van screeched to a halt, officers piling out, weapons raised. "Freeze on the ground, we've got them!" It was a perfect performance. They were catching Armitage in the act of kidnapping Cassian Vale's child. They would arrest Armitage, rescue the doll, and take Cassian himself into protective custody, silencing him before his hearing. "Showtime," Cassian said. Suddenly, the entire station was flooded with light, massive, blinding floodlights from 4 different angles, set by Juno, turned the dim platform into a movie set, The Armitage thugs and the MSU officers froze, caught in the impossible glare. 3 vans swarmed the station. One was full of independent press, summoned by an anonymous tip about police corruption. The other 2 were full of Cassian's legal team. They were all caught, live streaming. The MSU officers, standing side by side with the Armitage kidnappers, their guns pointed at a doll. Rory and Cassian stepped out of the shadows. Rory walked past the lawyers, past the cameras, and straight up to the stunned MSU commander. Her face was cold, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "You were right," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "You came here to stop a crime. You just didn't realize it was yours. You didn't catch my family. You just caught yourselves." Lark woke up hours later, not to gunfire, but to the smell of old paper and the sight of light filtering through stained glass. She was in the church library. Rory was sitting beside her, her face exhausted, but she was smiling. Rory gathered her daughter into her arms, burying her face in her hair. "It's almost over, baby," she promised, her voice thick. "And when this is done, I promise, you're going to have a real backyard, and we'll get you a dog." Lark, still half asleep, snuggled into her neck. "And Daddy," she whispered, "is Daddy going to be there every night?" Rory held her tight, a tear finally breaking free. "Yes, baby, he'll be there every night." Lakeward Hall was not a courtroom. It was a theater, built for symphony and speeches, all polished oak and soaring acoustics. Today, it was a coliseum. The public galleries were standing room only, a volatile mix of angry taxpayers, cynical press, and the dock workers who had once called Cassian a king. Cassian stood at the podium, his hand steady as he was sworn in. He did not act like a man on trial. He acted like a professor giving a lecture. He began with the transfer of the Lark Foundation, providing notarized, irrevocable proof. He followed with 3 decades of transaction histories from his father's organization, clearly delineating them from the new, Clean Veil Logistics. And then he signed the final document, his signature, bold and black, appearing on the massive screens overhead. It was an irrevocable commitment to dissolve all legacy associations defined as criminal enterprises. He was cutting off the past, and he was handing the state the knife. The room was processing the sheer, voluntary magnitude of it when the side doors burst open. Astra Lennox strode in, not in handcuffs, but in a blaze of righteous fury. She was flanked by 2 armed MSU officers and a pale, trembling woman from Child Protective Services. "This entire hearing is a fraud," Astra shouted, her voice ringing in the amplified space. She waved a sheaf of papers. "While this man distracts you with paperwork, he is actively endangering his child. I have an emergency order, signed by Judge Calder Nash, to take the minor, Lark Quinn, into immediate protective custody." The gallery exploded. The cameras whipped from Cassian to Astra. This was the counter move. "He's using the child as a human shield," Astra yelled. Cassian's lawyer, a thin man with a quiet voice, stepped forward. "We anticipated this contingency. May I see the order, please?" Astra, smirking, slapped it into his hand. The lawyer placed it under the document projector. The order was clear, and the signature was Nash's. "This order," the lawyer said, his voice mild, "is time-stamped 4:05 a.m. this morning. A judge, working very early. However," he produced a second document. "This is the passenger manifest for the 6 a.m. International Red-Eye to Zurich, and this is the confirmation of boarding for Judge Calder Nash, who, as we speak, is currently somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean." Astra's smirk froze. "The electronic signature on this emergency warrant," the lawyer continued, "was routed through a server at the Federal Annex Building, not the courthouse. This is a fraudulent order, and you, Special Envoy, just attempted to enforce it on live television." Astra's face crumpled. She looked at the MSU officers, who looked back, stunned. She looked at the cameras, all focused on her. She did not walk. She ran, shoving through the crowd, back out the side door she had entered. In the back of the auditorium, Juno, who'd been watching the exits, saw a different door open, one leading to the basement. Judge Calder Nash, the man who was supposed to be over the Atlantic, slipped out. "He's running," Juno's voice hissed into the earpiece Rory wore. "Basement level. He's heading for the concourse." Rory, standing behind Cassian, felt the blood drain from her face. She was torn. Her place was here, beside him, their anchor. But the man who had signed a warrant to steal her daughter was getting away. Cassian must have seen the war in her eyes. He didn't look at her, but his hand found hers, gripping it hard, a lifeline. "Go," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. "He doesn't get away. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She squeezed his hand once, and she ran. She followed Juno, her soft-soled nurse shoes silent on the concrete steps. The lakeward concourse was a maze of damp, dark service tunnels, smelling of mildew and river water. Rory pulled her phone, its flashlight cutting a bright, sterile beam through the gloom. They heard a splash and a curse. They rounded a corner. Judge Nash, his expensive suit soaked, was scrambling up from a pool of oily water. He had slipped as he fell. A small, silver USB drive flew from his grasp, skittering across the concrete and stopping near a drainage grate, the dirty treasury, the offshore accounts, the bribes. He lunged for it, but Rory was faster. Her foot came down, trapping the drive under her sneaker. Nash froze, looking up at her, his face a mask of pathetic terror. He was just a man, a weak, terrified old man who had tried to take her child. Rory had her flashlight balled in her fist like a weapon. She could feel the adrenaline, the rage. She could break his hand. She could kick him. She didn't. She was a healer. She let out a long, shuddering breath, the rage dissolving into a weary pity. She offered her free hand. "Get up, Judge, it's over." He looked at her hand, at her face, and he chose betrayal. He grabbed her hand, not to be helped, but for leverage. He yanked, pulling her off balance, and simultaneously shoved her, hard against the tunnel wall. Rory cried out as her shoulder slammed into the concrete, a sharp, white-hot pain. He snatched the USB drive and scrambled away into the darkness. "He's heading for the T-19 span," Rory yelled, pushing off the wall, her fury now cold and absolute. They burst out of the tunnel onto the railspan T-19, a skeletal iron railway bridge high above the industrial canal. The wind howled, and a cold rain began to fall. Astra Lennox was waiting. She stood in the middle of the tracks, her gun drawn, aimed directly at Juno. "Drop your weapon, Juno," Astra spat, her hair plastered to her face. "It's over." Juno stopped, her hands raised. "It is. Astra, but not for me. They have the warrant, they have your voice. It's done." "Drop it," Astra screamed, her voice cracking. Juno slowly unclipped her sidearm and slid it across the tracks. "Okay, you win. What now? You shoot me. You shoot Rory. You shoot the judge running away behind me. You're out of options." She was stalling. Astra hesitated, her eyes flickering to Nash, who was hiding behind a girder. She didn't hear Rory, who had her trauma shears in one hand and a roll of heavy, adhesive medical tape in the other. As Astra focused on Juno, Rory lunged from the shadows. She didn't go for the gun. She went for the hand. She slammed her body weight into Astra's back, driving her forward in the same motion. Her hands, trained by years of medical emergency, moved with blurring speed. She looped the heavy tape around Astra's hand, binding her finger off the trigger, and in the same wrap, depressed and covered the slide's safety, locking it in place. It was a perfect, non-lethal restraint. Astra cried out, trying to pull the trigger, but her finger was bound. The gun was useless, taped to her own fist. A deafening, low horn blasted the air. A bright, single light flooded the bridge. A freight train was coming, moving fast. The light illuminated everything. Nash, frozen in terror. Astra, struggling with the useless gun. And at the far end of the bridge, a tactical team, fanning out. "Civic Ward, freeze all of you on the ground." It wasn't Meridian. It was the new Independent Civic Ward Oversight Team. the one Cashin's lawyers had demanded. They swarmed the bridge, their own cameras rolling, capturing the entire scene on a live stream. They cuffed Nash, prying the USB drive from his fist. They cuffed Astra, cutting the tape from her hand. Rory sat on the edge of the girder, the rain washing her face, her body shaking. Her phone rang. FaceTime. She answered. Lark's face, safe in the church library, filled the screen. Mommy. Hi, baby, I'm okay. Where's Daddy? The call beeped, and Cassian's face joined the screen. He was still at the hall, surrounded by his lawyers, his eyes red. Lark, he said, his voice thick. I'm right here. I want you to know. Your mother. She's the bravest person I know, the bravest person in the whole world. Rory ended the call, a tear mixing with the rain. Juno walked up and stood beside her, looking out at the city skyline. Is it over? Rory whispered, her voice raw. Juno watched the distant lights of the port, where Armitage's ships were still moving. No, she said, her voice flat. It's not over. It's over when he doesn't have to look over his shoulder every time he walks out the door. Juno was right, it was not over. The Clean Ports Alliance, fueled by Rory's anonymous data drop, had moved with lightning speed, locking down Armitage's shipping lanes. The data was irrefutable, cornered, losing millions by the hour. Mace Armitage did what dying animals do. He decided to burn the world down. The call came just before midnight, not to the police, but to Cassian's secure line. It was Armitage himself. Orion Key, Warehouse 12, Wharf King. He sneered, his voice thick with hate. Come watch your legacy burn, or I'll send you the ashes of the men I found still working inside. He's lit the fires, Cassian said, his voice terrifyingly calm as he pulled on his suit jacket. You can't go, Rory pleaded, grabbing his good arm. It's a trap. Let Civic Ward handle it. They'll handle the fire, Cassian said, his eyes like ice. I have to handle Mace. This ends tonight, on the docks where it all started. He knew she was following him. He did not try to stop her. The pier was a scene from hell. The storm had circled back, a howling gale of wind and freezing rain that hissed as it hit the towering orange flames of Warehouse 12. Against this backdrop of fire and water, Mace Armitage stood at the end of the long pier, a dark silhouette flanked by a dozen of his hardest men. Rory stayed back, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, tucking herself into the deep shadow of a steel container stack. She was terrified, but she was not alone. In the gantries and cargo cranes high above, hidden in the storm, Juno had already positioned a Civic Ward tactical team. They were armed not with rifles, but with experimental non-lethal launchers, glue foam rounds, and weighted electronets. Cassian had insisted. It had to be clean. Cashin walked onto the pier alone, his dark suit jacket flapping in the furnace wind. Mace laughed, a harsh, barking sound that was ripped away by the gale. Look at the new king come to watch his legitimate future go up in smoke. It's just a building. Mace, Cashin called out, his voice steady. I won this city with fear, Vale, Mace roared. It's the only language they understand, the only thing that gets respect. You're wrong, Cashin called back, stepping closer, the heat scorching his face. I'm going to keep it with a cold chain that doesn't kill people? As he spoke, a fork of lightning, white and purple, split the sky, illuminating the two men in a stark, momentary flash. Two philosophies, two eras colliding in the storm. Empty words, Mace screamed, and he dropped his hand. His men charged. The sounds from above were not gunshots. They were heavy, wet thwumps and hisses. The first line of Armitage's men was neutralized, two of them instantly tangled in electronets. Three more stopping dead, their feet and legs suddenly encased in fast-hardening, concrete-like glue. But one got through, a thin, fast man who had seen Rory's movement. He ignored Cassian, his eyes locked on the shadows, a long, thin blade in his hand. Cassian saw the man's trajectory. He saw the target. Time slowed. He did not think. He reacted. Rory? He threw himself sideways, a desperate, instinctive lunge. He was not fast enough to stop the man, only to get between them. He shielded her with his body as the man lunged, his arm pistoning forward. Pain, sharp and white-hot, seared his forearm. The man's blade had sliced deep into the muscle. Cassian grunted, but he stayed upright, a wall between her and the threat. Before the attacker could strike again, a heavy, weighted line snapped out from the darkness, wrapping around his neck and torso. Juno. She pulled, and the man dropped, choked into submission by the simple zip-tie cord. Cassian staggered, clutching his arm. Blood, dark and arterial, ran between his fingers, steaming in the cold. Mace, seeing his men defeated, snarled. He pulled a flare gun from his jacket. "If I can't have it, no one can." He fired it, not at Cassian, but into the burning warehouse's open, cavernous loading bay. A secondary explosion blew the main doors off their tracks, and from deep inside, a new sound, a human scream. "There are still workers in there," a firefighter shouted from the perimeter. "We thought it was empty." Mace turned to run, escaping toward a waiting boat at the end of the pier. Cassian stood, torn. His arm was on fire. His enemy, the final thread, was escaping. But the screams... He looked at Rory, her face white with terror. He looked at the fire. He let Mace go. "Rory, help me," he yelled, and he ran, not after Mace, but toward the inferno. He grabbed a pry bar from a dock kit. Rory, her nursing instincts obliterating her fear, was right beside him. They jammed the bar into the twisted metal of a side access door, their combined weight forcing it open. They plunged into the black, choking smoke. They found 3 dock workers, trapped under a collapsed shelving unit, together, their movements desperate and synchronized. They hauled the men out, one by one, dragging them through the smoke and into the driving rain, just as the main roof collapsed behind them. The press, alerted to the fire, had arrived. Their cameras caught it all. Not the fight on the pier, but the rescue, the wharf king bleeding from his arm, his expensive suit ruined, choosing to save 3 unknown workers instead of settling his score. As they cleared the building, the full Civic Ward team swarmed the pier. Mace Armitage, trapped at the dock by Juno's team, was met with handcuffs. The metallic click was loud, final, like a bell tolling the end of an era. The next morning, Cassian Vale, his arm in a crisp white bandage and a black sling, stood before the Public Works Committee. He signed the final document. It was a complete dissolution of the old Vale network. 100% of his shares were transferred to the newly formed Vale Public Trust to be overseen by a board of citizens. He then accepted a new role, Chief Operating Officer of the nonprofit Clean Transport Initiative, a public salary, a fully audited position, no secrets, no way back. After the cameras were off, Rory approached him. She wasn't holding his hand. She was holding a simple manila envelope. "There's one last secret. Cassian." He opened it. Inside were notarized legal documents, a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity, a joint custody agreement, giving them equal rights. "No more running," Rory said, her voice soft. "No more hiding." He took the pen. His hand, the one that was not bandaged, was shaking. He signed his name, Cassian Vale, father, and when he looked up at her, his eyes were wet and a smile. The first truly free smile of his life was on his lips. The afternoon sun was warm at the Reedside house. It was a simple place with a wide, green backyard and a half-built swing set. A string of yellow lights was draped over the porch. Lark, finally home from St. Aurora's, sprinted across the new grass, launching herself into their arms. She hugged them both, her small arms tight. She looked up at Cassian, her amber eyes serious. "Daddy's here every night now." Cassian knelt, wincing slightly from the pull on his arm. He met her gaze, his voice thick. "Daddy's here. Little bird. Forever." Later, long after Lark was asleep, they sat on the porch. The cool lake wind rustled the reeds. The storm was, finally, over. Rory was leaning against him, his good arm wrapped around her, her head resting on his shoulder. He tilted her chin up, and the kiss was long and deep and full of promises. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the container. It was the kiss of two people who had found their way home. Their hands clasped, their foreheads touched. There was no need for words. The shared warmth, the steady beat of their hearts, the look in their eyes said everything. Across the water, the distant lights of the Southport container yard, the ones he no longer owned, twinkled in the clear night. They looked like industrial stars, quiet and peaceful. The final trap, the knot that had bound their lives in fear, had finally been untied, not by power or by force, but by the one choice that had been the hardest to make, to let go of an empire and to hold on to a family. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to hear your thoughts, and especially where in the world you are listening from. So please share in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, Mafia Boss Story, and like this video. And if you want to support us, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.